Hello. Thank you so much for joining us for our presentation titled Work Integrated Learning During COVID-19. My name is Zachary Mayo. I'm an assistant professor of business at St. Mary's University of Minnesota. I'm joined by Robert Gass, who's the director of sales at Wincraft, a Fanatics brand. Dr. William Nixon, who's an assistant director of equipment operations at Brigham Young University, also contributed to our presentation. Robert, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your role at Wincraft?
Sure, thanks, Zach. I've been with Wincraft nearly 8 years. I started as a sales associate, essentially out of college, and climbed the sales ladder of success to the director of sales position. I oversee our Western United States sales teams for retail and the college division. And up until about 2 weeks ago, we were Wincraft, and now we were acquired by Fanatics to complete their vertical commerce. So in addition to their apparel and headwear, they also now own the hard goods vertical standpoint.
Thank you so much, Robert. We appreciate it. And we'll get a little bit into more of what Wincraft is in a minute and what their relationship looks like with Fanatics. So today we're going to talk a lot about our integrated project, our work integrated learning project. First, we'll introduce the project and talk about the project design. Then we'll get into the classroom integration and the student and employer perceptions of the project, as well as the different successes and opportunities that we've had around the project also. And then we'll conclude with a few themes of what we've noticed and how other instructors would be able to successfully integrate a similar project in their classroom. So first, to summarize, the sport marketing students at St. Mary's University of Minnesota, we participate in a collaborative project with Wincraft. And Wincraft is an industry leader in licensing, in licensed manufacturing of hard goods. The purpose of this study was to further explore how students and employers perceive this project pre-COVID compared to during COVID. Now, the presentation itself, we will discuss student perceptions and also Wincraft's perceptions, as well as the project design, the integration strategies, successes, and opportunities for improvement. Robert, can you tell us a little bit more about Wincraft and Fanatics in the different types of items that you produce, the distribution that you have, where you might be located, and further information?
Sure. So Wincraft is a 60-year licensee. We pride ourselves on a domestic manufacturing model. We're licensed with all leagues, all teams, all players, all events. And Zach, you touched on hard goods earlier, and I think that's a term that's not necessarily used within the industry very commonly, but hard goods, as an example, would be decals, flags, towels, and magnets. For example, it's not headwear, it's not apparel, it's nothing that you can wear, except for gloves is part of our hard good assortment. We're the second longest licensee within the NFL, only behind the official football of the NFL. We have about 525 employees located in Winona, Minnesota. You can find us in all channels of distribution, from e-commerce to mass retailers to mom-and-pop retailers located locally within each market.
And for those of you that are reviewing our presentation, you'll also notice that one of our keynote speakers, John Killen, who's the Senior Vice President for Fanatics and the President of Wincraft, also works with the same organization and oversees this organization. And John Killen also had mentioned some really interesting historical context of how Wincraft came to be, and really the history behind Wincraft. And it's pretty amazing. And I would encourage all of our listeners to also review that keynote speaker presentation as well. Now, talking a little bit about what Wincraft was looking for and how Wincraft could collaborate, Robert, could you tell us a little bit about maybe the reasons why we decided to do this project. What did you see that you were looking for, and what is the sport industry looking for in recent graduates?
Right. So it's crazy to think, Zach, I met you 3 years ago is when I believe you joined the St. Mary's professor and really specialized in sport management. As you are aware, I'm an alum of St. Mary's where I received my undergraduate. I received my master's of sport management from West Virginia University. And when Zach came on board, we were able to meet at an event and really understood his passion and drive to better students, and not just from an education and a book standpoint. It was really a real life experience. So we sat down and we set up a meeting for Zach, myself, John Killen, as Zach mentioned, and kind of came up with a plan of what opportunities or what's something we could do to collaborate in. And when we look at our hiring base, not just within Windcraft, but really within the entire sport industry, from just communications we have across the board, is that we're looking for decision-making skills. Data analytics are a huge part of our business. And I think even you look back to 3 or 5 years ago, how much it's changed from that standpoint, as well as oral and written communication skill, but not just from a textbook standpoint and a paper writing, really real life presenting and real life communications on how to get a deal or an opportunity done. But then of course, what Windcraft prides itself in is customer service. And it's really incorporating a lot of those skills to really provide the best customer service. And I think, Zach, when we met, I'll let you touch on it a little bit more, but we really started to dive into what we're missing when we're doing interviews and the skill set that we see, not just for the next 2 years, 3 years, but 10 years out, 15 years out.
So not only does Robert talk right from the horse's mouth, right from the perspective of a prospective employer, but also research around experiential learning, work integrated learning, and other forms of experiential learning often finds that these research results show that traditional students, they often lack experience when they're trying to gain that first position within the sport industry. And so we notice that individual companies such as Windcraft and others really are needing these sets of skills for their employees to have in order to hit the ground running and be able to be an effective employee to really move that needle per se. So also within an extensive review of literature, we've also seen that students report that they learn effectively, and actually most effectively, by applying their knowledge. I don't believe that this is any new information that many instructors don't already know, is that applying knowledge helps students reinforce the learned skills from the classroom. Now, sport industry professionals also are reporting that on-the-job experience is necessary for recent grads. Recent grads must have experience that's on-the-job training in order to ensure the efficacy of what they are doing within their roles. So that being said, Robert and I, as well as John Killen, we created a project, and this project we titled the Win Bowl. It was intended to be a play on words, such as Windcraft, and a bowl, such as a bowl game or a competition. So we developed this work integrated learning opportunity for St. Mary's students who were specific within the sport management program. We decided that it would be a great place for us to house that competition within our sport marketing class. Typically within the sport marketing class, we usually have about 20 students annually who are enrolled in the class. As part of the classroom design and the project design, we divide students into groups, typically 5 groups, where students are able to collaborate amongst group members and create competition amongst their groups and other groups within the class. Now, in order to design a real-time project, the instructor, which is typically myself, will collaborate with other Windcraft personnel, such as Robert or John Killen, to develop a really unique opportunity and a real-time initiative. And by doing such, we create an RFP for our students to respond to. Now, the individuals that we're collaborating with, like I mentioned, are Robert Gass, Director of Sales, John Killen Jr., who is the marketing manager, John Killen, who's the president or CEO of Windcraft. Now, students, what they do is they present their proposals to Windcraft executives, to outside constituents, and also to university personnel. Students have the opportunity to present their research and to present their project and their findings to all these individuals, which is pretty impressive. Regarding the students and the personnel of Windcraft themselves, Windcraft personnel typically make themselves available as resources for the students throughout the semester. The students actually are required to sign a non-disclosure agreement to make sure that they are understanding the sensitivity of the information that is being shared with them. Because students do gain a lot of resources and a lot of information about the company that typically the traditional person would not be able to find or gain. And we've found that as students are signing those non-disclosure agreements, that they take this agreement very seriously, and that they respect the clauses that are within, so that they are not disclosing any information about the company that they shouldn't be. Also, the Windcraft personnel will assist in determining the annual Wind Bowl champion and the group that wins. And also, each RFP is a little bit different. And so not one specific set of skills that the groups possess will definitely lead to winning the next year, because each RFP and each project is really based upon a real-time strategic initiative. So, for example, a couple of years ago, we had a project that was based upon the Overwatch League, and really understanding exactly how to bring hard goods to a esports type of situation, similar with the NBA 2K League. We had another project that was based upon that. This year was based upon a omni-channel marketing strategy for Windcraft in general. And so each year has a slightly different theme, which every year is based upon like I said, a real-time strategic initiative. And that brings a wonderful and unique opportunity for our students to be able to see what they are working on is directly impacting what is going on with the company, right away. Another aspect of how we've incorporated this project into the classroom is this concept of a final project versus continual project versus suite of options. What I mean by this is that what we typically use this project and how we've seen success within this project has been typically a continual project throughout the semester, that the students continually work on the project, but it's also used as their final project. We've noticed throughout the last couple of years, we have used the Wind Bowl as, for one of the 3 years, we used it as a suite of options. That specific year, was probably resulted in a not as successful integration methodology. And that's probably because too many students are focused on too many projects within one class. And so we've noticed that a continual project and also used as a final project is the most successful strategy for us. We've also paid close attention to the level of involvement that the instructor should play when integrating this project into the classroom. What I mean by this is a liaison versus a manager versus a professor, right? The level of involvement, we've seen the highest level of success in the instructor playing smaller roles in each of those three categories. What I mean by this is not every student will arrive day one in our sport marketing class possessing all the skills that they need in order to successfully execute the project. Well, in that situation, I, as the instructor, might need to be the professor, teaching them the skills that they need. Whereas there might be other students that arrive already with the skills that they need, but might not have the understanding of how to collaborate with a real, true industry leader. So therefore, I might need to be more of a manager. I might have to put my manager hat on for those students at that time, teaching them a little bit of how to conduct themselves with the company and learn the company culture. And then other students might just not have the skills they need in order to just network with some individuals in WinCraft. And so more of being a liaison and helping those students and also WinCraft to be able to connect so that they can speak to one another and make sure that all parties have the appropriate information in order to execute the RFP. So some of the skills that Robert and I have seen that students need to have or need to possess in order to be successful in these projects are very much so business related skills, such as search engine optimization, understanding the differences between financial analysis, net present value versus return on investment, and how certain decision making models could lead to choosing one project over another project, which also leads into project management skills and understanding different project management platforms. Some of the groups that have been most successful have actually used their own project management platforms to be able to manage what each group member needs to do in order to get the project done through utilization of Gantt charts and other types of project management skills or project management I should say ways to manage projects, right? Lastly, or second to last, social media analytics. So much of what the sport industry does is integrated into social media. So being a sport marketing class, understanding social media analytics and how to drive customers to purchase things is almost the name of the game, and I'm sure that Robert could attest to that, right? Driving customers to behave in a certain way is really the name of the game, is it not?
It is, and they prove research that we didn't even think about in some of those regards, the social media analytics.
So other types of ways that, in doing research, I'm going to talk a little bit about SPSS or other similar statistical packages, right? Our students are required to do a lot of market research, and therefore they need to analyze data and see where the correlations are and be able to run a number of different analyses to make sure that we are presenting exactly what it is that Windcraft needs. It needs to know about their customer base. As far as a classroom approach, there, like I kind of mentioned before, in my level of involvement as an instructor, we integrate a very mixed methods approach to the classroom, whether that be instruction versus team meetings or check-ins versus meetings with the employers and different working sessions. Robert, can you just comment just a little bit? It was part of what we did 2 years ago with having our students actually host meetings at Windcraft's headquarters, and how that kind of how that went for you, and what did you see as the groups would actually go to Windcraft and have a working session with y'all at Windcraft?
Yeah, so the 2 years ago when we were in person, we actually essentially checked out, outlooked a calendar for our conference rooms, 2 of them within our building. And I believe it was Tuesdays and Thursdays that they would come to the office. They would usually drive as a team to the office, each individual team. And I believe it was 2 or 3 teams each day that would arrive. Over the time, it was funny to see the first week of interaction of them in an office setting, because this conference room, you have to walk through the building and engage with employees, and there's a lot of eyes on them walking through here. So I felt they dressed the part. They acted a lot more mature than when we went to see them in the classroom setting, I believe, or on campus. They began to know the front desk lady. When they would show up, she would just say, and they would walk them to the conference rooms. But it really engaged their professionalism, as most of them, unless they spent a bring your kid to work day with their parents, really weren't involved in a workplace. And I think that just took the project to the next level. It allowed me to be in my office, and if they needed something, they would either call me or they'd walk over to my office and engage in a question. And I think it grew them professionally and in their seriousness of taking the project, to say, this is the real deal. It's a real project. It's a real issue that the company is having, or opportunity that the company is trying to research. And really, it brought them to the next level of from student to a junior professional.
Thank you so much. And so while the students, and Robert, you had said there was a couple groups or teams that would come in each day on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Very true. And while there was some students, so to gain my perception or my perspective as the instructor, I have half or 2/3 or whatever it is of the class that is actually at Windcraft. The other portion of the class I have in the classroom on Tuesday. On Thursday, then that flip-flops, right? So the students that were at Windcraft on Tuesday are now in the classroom. And the students that were in the classroom are now at Windcraft. And so the interesting nature of it was that the working with each of the teams, I was able to see the information and the skills and see the new perspectives on a daily basis rotating through, and seeing those students grow and progress, even on a weekly basis, let alone throughout the semester. Because those conversations that they would have with you and the other employer liaisons, because we had 3 liaisons during that year, the conversations that our students had with y'all was phenomenal. They gained so many insights into learning really how to act and to become that junior professional, that you had mentioned, Robert. And so So we saw that that was a very successful method in integrating or having that classroom approach where, part of the week some students are at Windcraft for class, right? They are at Windcraft, whereas then other students are in class and then flip-flopped on the opposite day. Talking a little bit about the student perception that we have. So the research project that, or I should say the research side of what we are doing is measuring the perceptions. And so there were themes that came from these phenomenological interviews and also written responses. And we are comparing perceptions, student perceptions and employer perceptions from pre-COVID to during COVID. So some of the responses that you will see are ironically going to be similar for student perceptions compared to employer perceptions. For example, the student groups pre-COVID, it was one of the themes that arose from the interviews and from the written responses were that students felt as though that their groups were highly intra-connected. So one of the designs of the project is that each group is competing against the other group. So typically from group to group, students are not necessarily sharing ideas with each other, but idea sharing is going on within the group, which is why I say intra-connected. So they noticed that their groups were highly intra-connected. They also noticed and felt as though the physical tours that they took of the facilities, of Windcraft's facilities, were incredibly important to be able to see with their own eyes what Windcraft does and how they do the processes that they have. The students felt as though that they gained a real experience, and that real experience in becoming a junior professional truly enhanced the classroom setting. Lastly, the learning company culture and workplace norms. Students felt as though that they were actually able to become part of the company and learn the company culture and feel it and live it. And they felt as though that was as well beneficial. Now, student perceptions during COVID unfortunately led to not as beneficial or not as positive as pre-COVID. Mostly, if you look at the themes, mostly due to meeting virtually. So students felt as though that during COVID that their groups were less intra-connected, and that we as St. Mary's and Windcraft did as best as we possibly could, given the constraints that we had. So we provided a virtual tour, which students felt was beneficial, but it also left them wanting more. They wanted to be able to hear the sounds and touch the items and see the processes that only a camera only has so wide of an angle, right? And so they couldn't experience it to the same level as what someone was able to the previous couple of years. So the virtual tour they did feel was very beneficial, but they wanted more. They felt as though that the experience was less than real compared to the previous year, because again, they weren't able to be there in person. And it was just due to the virtual environment that they had. So when I say less than real, what was meant by this, or what arose within the themes, were often more than a basic paper or project, but less than what a real world in-person experience was. So it was still beneficial, just less than real. Also, students noticed that they were more easily distracted when meeting virtually. And that led to somewhat of a disconnect with the project, and most notably with the company culture. They felt as though because meeting virtually, they weren't able to experience the company culture to the level that they would have liked. And again, this is, I think, part of the virtual nature of life right now. Talking a little bit about the employer perception. So employer perception, again, phenomenological interviews and written responses. Pre-COVID, employers were really happy. So when I say employer, I'm meaning Windcraft and the personnel that we worked with at Windcraft. The Windcraft personnel was very pleased by the number of students, the intensity of them, that they were networking with employees during as well as post project completion. Robert, would you be able to comment a little bit about just students networking and reaching out to you, and how how that went?
Yeah, so when they were in the office, obviously we built a really good personal relationship, and then of course a professional relationship as well. LinkedIn is a really powerful tool in this day and age. So a lot of those students added myself on LinkedIn, added up the few other liaisons, but then you started to see them add other employees throughout the Windcraft model. And I think they used it as a social networking, just saying, hey, I know you weren't involved, but I saw Windcraft. I'd love to learn more about what you did. And I think it's really interesting. And I know you're touching pre and post COVID, or pre and during COVID, but I look at the employees that we used to hire from St. Mary's as part-time individuals that would just work a first shift, second shift employees in our manufacturing facilities. And there would maybe be one a year from St. Mary's. And after this first time, I actually just noticed as I get more LinkedIn connections is that there's a lot of students at St. Mary's that I don't know if it's through their friends' connections through the classes, and some of these students are accepting part-time and full-time or part-time manufacturing jobs. And even some now this year I'm noticing are more full-time employees, either in an office setting or still within the manufacturing facility as part-time as they continue school. And I'm not seeing that same interaction from the during COVID, which I know you'll talk about here.
No, thank you. So that gives you a great perspective of really what the employer themselves are thinking. And one thing also that the Windcraft personnel noticed was that the pre-COVID company processes were really understood and better understood. And that the projects allowed students to be much more comfortable with individuals in the workplace and with walking in, right? As you had mentioned before, Robert, walking in, saying hi to the receptionist, and knowing exactly who everyone was really beneficial. Similar to the students, you all saw that the student groups were highly connected as well, and that they worked collaboratively very well. And also about the company culture, you all felt as though that the students who experienced and learned the company culture had an advantage over prospective employees that didn't have that experience. And so that goes to show, similar to Robert's comments, that these experiences are really necessary for students in order to gain employment post-graduation. Now, during COVID, again, similar to how the students' perceptions were, during COVID, fewer students attempted to network with Windcraft employees, and it might be the virtual nature of our life right now. Also, you had noticed that student groups, similar to student perceptions, were less intraconnected. and that company processes were not as well understood. Same with culture. Now, again, it's interesting that these perceptions were very, very similar to what the students perceived of themselves. Also, the employer noticed that students seemed to be less engaged when meeting with company representatives virtually, which also I think relates to the student perception of being distracted virtually. And so that is very understandable that those two would correlate with one another. Specifically talking about the presentations. So historically, we've done the presentations live and at WinCraft. So we would go into WinCraft's conference room or boardroom and be able to, and the students would present their projects to WinCraft executives and other members at WinCraft. Whereas during COVID, we were unable to do that and had to go through a pre-recorded presentation, probably similar to what our listeners or people reviewing this presentation are experiencing right now. And what was noticed during these presentations was that the pre-recorded presentations were unfortunately a little bit less professional than the live presentations, which leads me to believe that a greater emphasis should be focused on preparing students how to act more professionally virtually, right? And that would help and benefit them tremendously. Also during COVID, again, maybe due to the virtual environment, it was a little bit more difficult to identify those prospective employees. Similar to what Robert had said before back on the project a couple of years ago, right? The students were there in the workplace. They saw the culture, they felt it, they knew the processes. This year was a little bit more difficult to identify those individuals because, well, the students weren't in the environment, right? And so they weren't on the field of play. Right? They were just in the batting cage, as opposed to actually being out on the baseball field or something to that effect. Right? Also, one thing that we all noticed was that this year's topic was probably a little bit too broad and not as focused as previous topics. And so we saw that there might be a room for improvement for future years. So talking about room for improvement, so we wanted to discuss our successes as well as opportunities for improvement that we noticed throughout these last couple of years. So first success was that we felt strongly that we developed a mutually beneficial relationship between us as a university and WinCraft as a company. And so those instructors that are looking to do something similar to this, I would encourage you to, or we would encourage you to find an organization that both the university and the organization can have a mutually beneficial partnership. And how that is mutually beneficial for us is that from the St. Mary's perspective, we're developing our students better. They are able to more effectively learn those skills by implementing the skills that they're learning in the classroom into a real life environment. WinCraft as a company, you're developing prospective employees, right? And you're teaching them company culture before they're even in the company. And so that provides a leg up for them, which is great. Also, WinCraft gains a fresh perspective and insightful look at different initiatives that they might not be able to dedicate a full-time person to, right? So by integrating a project within WinCraft can see what the consumer behavior might look like, not just from the students' research, but also from the students that are working on the projects themselves. What catches their eye? What is brought to their attention? So Wincraft gains a fresh look on consumer behavior in a way that they wouldn't otherwise get. Also, we felt as though that our concise RFPs and project outlines really helped the students historically. Now, I said, in the last slide that there was an opportunity for improvement in having too broad of a topic. True. Still, the concise RFP and the project outline was very successfully done, and we could just improve in selecting specific topics, especially if continuing virtually in the years to come. Some of the opportunities for improvement might be, we all noticed increasing funds for market research. So over the last couple of years, I think we've done a great job in working with what we have. But moving forward, we've noticed that the types of projects that are slated for future opportunities, we might need some additional funds in order to conduct the level of market research that's needed. And so, soliciting funds from the university, from the dean, collaboratively between the university and the company might be an opportunity for improvement there. Also, if we need to continue virtually, we also notice that increasing check-ins with company representatives would be beneficial. This past year, maybe due to the virtual environment, we probably did not meet with Wincraft representatives as frequently as we could have, and there's an opportunity for improvement there as well. And so we would encourage any instructors that are looking to do this type of a project to make sure that touch points and check-ins with the company are held on a very, very frequent basis. Ensuring more topics are specific is what I've already touched upon. And making sure that students are able to gain a better sense of workplace norms, company culture, processes would be so beneficial to our students, your students in general. And then lastly, emphasizing virtual professionalism. One thing that I think myself and probably many other people didn't necessarily take into account at the level that it was needed was students don't quite know exactly yet how to be as professional as they can be virtually, right? And to be able, I think that people in general, we might just not know this yet. Meeting virtually is not necessarily the norm, especially in your traditional on-ground, in-person environment for universities. And so emphasizing virtual professionalism in the classroom would prove to be incredibly beneficial as well. And that was an area that we could have improved upon for our project. Lastly, or in conclusion, I should say that there are a few final points that we would like to make. First, work integrated learning opportunities are necessary for students. They need these. They need them in order to gain skills and test skills that are required of the workforce. And universities have been led to different paradigm pressures, and these paradigm pressures can cause us as instructors to redesign our curriculum, which is a great thing. And so we should really be considering how to better integrate work integrated learning opportunities. Also, the themes that we've had for this project really suggest a strong emphasis on students needing to fully understand company culture and virtual professionalism. And they need these in order to ensure gainful employment, especially in the world that we live in today. Overall, the students and the employer believed that everyone gained a valuable experience to this project, and that students felt that they increased their employability. The Windcraft and the company felt that they had the opportunity to be exposed to people that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to work with or consider for future employment. And so either way, this project was incredibly beneficial to both students and employer at the same time. Lastly, we just want to say thank you for listening to us for the last however long this has been, right? We greatly appreciate it, and we hope that if you have any questions that you would feel comfortable to reach out to us. Our emails are on the screen, so please reach out to us in any way that we we can answer any questions that you might have, and we'd be happy to further discuss or collaborate in any way we can as well. So thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate you reviewing our presentation. So Julia, I see that you're on the call. Could you tell us just maybe where you're from and what brings you here and everything like that?
Hi, yes, sure. I am an instructor at Grand Prairie Regional College, which is in Northern Alberta, Canada. So nowhere near where any of you are, but that's okay. But I did go to grad school at the University of Minnesota, so the awesome. Minnesota connection. And I taught at Minnesota State University before I moved back here. This is where I'm originally from. So, and I have a crazy schedule last week and this week, so I haven't had a chance to view a ton of presentations, and I don't really have a good opportunity to jump into a lot of sessions. So I'm just trying to catch all the ones I can before my crazy day gets started. But I am really interested in the idea of work integrated learning, and they're doing a big review of our post-secondary throughout all of Alberta. And that's a term that has come up every session that I've gone to, anytime anybody talks about anything, work integrated learning comes up all the time. So I'm just trying to really see what people are saying about it and think about how it can apply to the program I teach in, which is a kinesiology program.
So are you a sport management professor in a kinesiology school, or are you mostly focused on kinesiology?
We only have one sport management class in our program. So our program is a diploma program that's primarily for transfer to the University of Alberta. Students can transfer other places, and I'm kind of working on broadening that. And I'm also working on right now, I just started working on a sport management diploma. So fingers crossed that gets approved for not next year, but the year after. So
that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah. So I'd like to kind of expand a little bit what we're doing here, but it's a slow process. So yes, but I did teach fully in a sport management program when I was at Minnesota State.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, so my name is Zachary Mayo. I teach at St. Mary's University of Minnesota here in Winona. Robert Gass, he works for Windcraft, which is now a part of the Fanatics brand. Robert's a graduate of St. Mary's as well. And so I guess once you come to Winona, you never leave Winona, right? So anyway, we set up a really interesting collaborative project with Windcraft. And this was prior to Windcraft being acquired by Fanatics. So a couple of years ago, when I first got here to St. Mary's, I noticed this awesome company called Windcraft, which was 5 miles down the road. And I said, what is this place, right? And I went in and I met with Robert, and he gave me a tour and so on and so forth. And it's just been, an awesome partnership ever since. And I'm not sure if you're all that familiar with Windcraft, but maybe Robert, you could give her just a little rundown of what you guys make and all that kind of stuff, and then we'll get into what our study was all about.
Yeah, just a 30,000 view. We are the leader in hard goods manufacturing for sporting merchandise, licensed merchandise. The Gatorade towels you see on pro benches and college benches, we do those. We do flags, lanyards, decals, magnets, license plate frames, beach towels, gloves, golf product, you name it. If it's something you don't wear besides gloves in the sport industry, it most likely came from us. We are a domestic manufacturer, probably about 85+% of our business is domestically made here in the United States, and we import a few items and of course material import as well. But we were the leader. We've been in the industry for 60 years where we hold all licenses, all leagues, all teams, all players, all events. And then 65 days ago, we were acquired by Fanatics, which completes their verticalness of apparel, headwear, and now the last bit was hard goods, which is now the Windcraft portion of it. So Winona is the center of excellence for hard goods in the license industry.
Yeah, so from there, I saw, and Robert and I both saw an opportunity to collaborate a bit, which really plays right into what this presentation was all about, which was the work integrated learning. So Robert often told a story of when he was a student here. He had no idea what Windcraft was, and Windcraft was only 5 miles down the road. The largest or leader in manufacturing of hard goods, of licensed sport, hard goods, didn't even know what it was, right? Graduated, then came back to Winona after being offered a job here, and through that story, he and I both realized that there was a need for our students to be able to understand this entire industry that really feeds sport, right? And feeds what sport is all about, and the licensing and marketing behind sport. And so we developed this collaborative project that's specifically with our sport marketing class here on campus. And so what we do within the class is we give our students the opportunity to work on a real-time strategic initiative that Windcraft is then currently working on. So one of the examples that we have, I think it was 2 years ago, our students worked on a collaborative project with Windcraft on esports. So Windcraft was approached by a few different esports leagues, such as the NBA 2K and the Overwatch League, to be able to provide some, hard goods and develop some concepts for them and all that kind of stuff. So immediately we set up a project with Windcraft on this whole concept. And it was really neat because it was the first time that an esports league was really looking to, license some product and get it out in the hands of, retailers and whatnot, and basically test the market. And so our students, had to sign a non-disclosure agreement about the whole thing. And for essentially the entire semester, they had an opportunity of working with Windcraft, which was awesome. Robert, as well as 2 other Windcraft employees, were set up as somewhat of team leaders, right? So I divided out the class into a variety of different groups. And within the class, each group was essentially competing against one another in a competition, a bowl game, right? So we titled it the Win Bowl. So, just a play on words. So the Windcraft Win Bowl, and each of the 5 or 6 groups, Robert, I think there was 5 or 6 groups, right? I think it was 6 because there was 2 groups per lead. So 6 groups within the class, and then each group had a Windcraft employee who was their liaison, right? The group lead. Robert was the group lead over 2 of our groups. There was another lady named Liz. She was overseeing another group, and then JR was over the other 2 groups. So within this structure, we set up really what we figured to be a very successful foundation for effective communication, for developing potential future employees, right? Because they're getting some direction from the company itself, and basically in this model, our students were able to integrate themselves right into the culture of the company. The class itself met for 2 days a week. So I think it was a Thursday and a Tuesday, Thursday type of a situation. One day a week was in class where I had half the groups in class. And then the other day, the groups were at Windcraft. So on any given day, myself as the instructor, I only had half the class. And so if you were scheduled to meet on Tuesday, then you were in class on Tuesday versus, you went down to Windcraft and had your group meetings with the liaison on the opposite day, right? So it was a lot of communication, very effective. And I mean, Robert can speak for himself, but I think that the students during that, 2 years ago had a phenomenal time of learning the company culture and getting to know who you guys were all about. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah. So, we would give them, there was 3 teams here at each day. And so we would give them boardrooms to sit as a team, and they were always available to, if they wanted to sit in the cube area where some of our team sits, that was always open to them. But it was more they could walk to my office and say, hey, I have a question on financials. Because they signed a non-disclosure, we were able to, this wasn't just make-believe numbers or ideas. This was a real project saying, hey, what is your cost on X product and how does that process work? So that they could come to us strategically with I think these 5 products are going to sell best based on my research, and the viability of the company, the return on the investment would be X. So they had real numbers and real data that really encompassed them into the Windcraft brand, and they became a familiar face for 4 months of the year.
So, I mean, it was awesome, right? Like the structure of it was awesome. And now fast forward a little bit to the experiences that we had just this past semester, right? So with COVID, we obviously had some, we were not able to predict that we were going to have these, constraints on the projects. We still had a collaborative project with Windcraft, but the structure of it was obviously completely different this go around. And unfortunately, the students weren't able to go into the buildings, or they weren't able to have those, consistent meetings with the liaisons, because it just, life got turned upside down, right? So what we did notice, so for our study, what we did was we compared student perception and employer perceptions from pre-COVID to during COVID, right? So the perceptions that were gained from the 2 constituent groups, pre-COVID, during COVID, right? What we noticed were some constant themes, right? So the pre-COVID in-person experience, we noticed that the student groups, so from the employer perspective, Robert and JR and John Killen and all these individuals that were on the employer side, pre-COVID, they all noticed, as well as the students noticed, that the students were able to learn company culture and workplace norms, that the students seemed to gain some real experience that was beyond just the classroom. Both groups also perceived, and I found this to be interesting, that both groups perceived that the groups themselves were more closely intra-connected. And so it was really neat to see that the employers perceived in person to be more interconnected and the groups themselves perceived to be more interconnected in person, right? Now, the during COVID situation, right? The unfortunate side of it was the groups just were not as connected. And we were unsure if that was because of, Zoom fatigue, or if that's because of, just the inability to meet in person and whatnot. We, as myself as the instructor of the course, and then Robert and the other individuals that were on the Windcraft side, that we tried to make the experience as, real as possible. But a virtual tour is different than a in-person tour. It's just different. And so that's where there was still, it was more of a arm's length connection as opposed to completely being integrated into the workplace environment. So that kind of sums up a little bit of the perceptions that we had. We noticed a few different opportunities that we could have, improved upon, as well as some suggestions that the Windcraft folks had for students in general that are needing to navigate themselves through this COVID time, right? So first, some of the opportunities that we felt that we could improve upon was because, like I said in the beginning, each year the topic is a little bit different, right? So 2 years ago was the esports thing. This past year was bringing what was basically making a omni-channel. How do I describe it?
I can say Windcraft sells business to business, and we launched our direct to consumer site. So we had never sold direct to an individual. So that was kind of the marketing strategy, is what the last semester was what's our marketing strategy. And essentially, Zach, I can mention it here. The 2 years ago, we found it successful for all the reasons Zach talked about, but that it was very specific. It was very, here are two leagues, the NBA 2K League and the Overwatch Esports League. What is our consumer? What products are going to be best for those brands? Whereas the direct to consumer was a bit broad. It was a marketing plan that could have went anywhere. So we discussed that future projects, and we'll continue to do this for many years with the partnership with St. Mary's, is that it needs to be very specific and maybe a team oriented or a season oriented, and it can't just be give us your recommendation on a broad topic. That we really need to narrow it down so that their focus is on the project in hand.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
To what degree do you use that student feedback? How do you kind of coordinate that with your own internal research? What are they way off? Are they really close? Are they seeing things you're not seeing? Is it really valuable?
The esports, so there were 6 groups, and I would say 3 of them brought a lot of data. They were all great presentations, but 3 of them really brought data to us where they presented and we sat there and said, wow, we did not think of that. We didn't think that that was the demographic that we were trying to sell, or that, oh, that's an interesting product. We didn't think that a computer decal would have made sense, because people see these players, if they somehow had them on a computer, it's a good idea. So it took us out of our comfort zone to really look at a bigger picture of opportunities and unique product categories. So I would say we integrated quite a bit on that. And I think some of the students that we built good connections with, we followed up with them and kind of told them, like, hey, we utilize this information from you, which makes just a fun story for LinkedIn connections and staying in touch, that there's always that personal connection. The marketing, I would say we used some of the ideas from, hey, you should really focus on this league because based on our research and studies that these leagues would perform better. But what we found was that because the college demographic, if an athlete, there was a basketball player on one of the groups, their data showed NBA should be our best performing as a company, where our data very strongly would challenge that. And when we challenged the group, it was, yes, we utilized all of our basketball contact friends in our surveys. So there's a little bit of a skew there to say, you're showing NBA that we should invest all of our marketing into NBA, but as a company, NBA is not our number one property sold. So it was unique situations like that where you really push their buttons to say, how did you get this data? This seems very skewed. And then they're students, right? They're learning, and they didn't think to expand their reach of their market research. It was very internal. So it's just funny, there's 6 groups every year or so, and there's always 1 or 2 groups where you're like, I think we know what you did here, but and then other groups brought really great data and at supporting that we utilized in our market research, because one of the individuals that was the liaison was our marketing manager, and he utilized schedules, calendars that they built for us and said, this is when you should launch, and this is how you appeal to these certain demographics with your product. So Zach, I don't know if you had anything to add on that.
No, I mean, I think that the biggest takeaway from comparing the 2 years in the narrowness of the projects is that the students are going to be more successful in these, at least from our experience, in these work integrated learning opportunities when they are given more specific direction and more specific projects, because they're just not ready for propose anything, right? And so that was just kind of the theme that we noticed for that. We also noticed a theme, and it's probably my fault because I just didn't think to have to say it, right? But professionalism on Zoom is so needed, right? I was really surprised to see, and because in person, right, I constantly would say, you got to dress and look the part. You got to, you're going into Windcraft is the Nike of hard goods, right? Like like that's what this is. John Killen is he sits at the same table as all of those, all of those individuals, those other CEOs. It's just people aren't familiar a lot with Windcraft because it's a business to business model as opposed to, or it has historically been a business to business model. So unfortunately, during this go around on Zoom, and it could have been a Zoom fatigue thing, right? But we saw far too many hoodies and far too many, and I don't know if it was just that they became comfortable with being too comfortable. We're not sure. I didn't collect that data because it was just an observation that we made right at the very end, because it wasn't anything that we expected. So I think that it was just in person, they were able to see, again, it relates to company culture and how people dress professionally going to work, and they didn't get that because they couldn't be there as well. So.
I'll add, Zach, what I told Zach was I think Zoom creates kind of a protection, a shield, where in person they're very, they get the sweats, they're getting nervous, they're presenting, you challenge them. And in Zoom, they're sitting in, some of these guys were in their parents' basement or in their bedroom with poor lighting, and you would ask them a question on, hey, show me your data, show me the research, and they would just casually sit there and say, I don't have it. I don't have it available. And in person, that's a nervous, they sit there and they feel it. But on Zoom, they didn't feel any, not that you want to make them feel bad, but there wasn't any repercussion that there was an issue with you not having that data because I'm sitting 300 miles away from you. They just kind of said, I don't have it, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So
Robert, have you hired anybody?
We've
program?
had 2 years ago, it's funny, they've all, I would say not an official internship, but we had some sport management and graphic design majors, and they sat with our marketing individual for a month or two. We had a couple individuals work with our art department director, and he kind of showed them the systems we use and how we operate. We've had part-time help where they've actually said, I just want to get involved and have the Windcraft name on my resume, but I can't commit to a part-time job or a full-time job while I work. So they actually took jobs in our factories, and they knew, based on the conversations with myself, John, others in Windcraft, that having that Windcraft name carries you in a good manner when you apply for another sport job if you don't end up at Windcraft. So we would love to have hired many, and I think many of them, I would say probably 50% of the students would have loved to have been at Windcraft. But there's one deterring factor, and it's Winona, Minnesota. It is hard to keep students in a small college town. We have Rochester, we have La Crosse, Wisconsin, which are major cities, but that is the one downfall of Windcraft was that. But now that we're fanatics and we're a little bit more in this day and age, remote working, we see a lot of positives. So looking forward to the next year's project as well with this.
yeah, I think that there would probably have been a few more hires if we were, to be honest with you, if we were in a little bit of a bigger city. Unfortunately, we have 25,000 people. We've got two big cities right near each other that are only 35 to 50 minutes away. And then the Twin Cities, which is 2 hours away. Those are the hubs, and we're just not a hub.
But I will say what it creates these student connections. So they all add us on LinkedIn. So I've got 50 students every year that add me on LinkedIn, and I've gotten them interviews or network connections within the industry. There was a student a couple years ago from Canada, and he wanted to move back to Edmonton, and I knew some connections at Edmonton Oilers. So I got him an interview, made a connection, and he took a job with them, ironically. So I think some of that is they take away a big part of their learning, but also how can we help you then alternatively?
I have a question about, you mentioned the professionalism on Zoom as I'm sitting here in a hoodie and basement, on the couch. But to be fair, our campus doesn't open until 7 a.m. And so when the first presentation started, it was like exactly at 7. So I wasn't able to go to campus before. But anyways, on that note, so with moving forward, since you noticed the kind of lack of professionalism on Zoom or lack of preparation, are there any things that you're doing differently in the way you're teaching to help better prepare students for being in this kind of environment? Because I think even post-COVID, we're probably still going to be using this type of stuff more frequently than we ever did pre-COVID. So is there anything that you're doing differently to help prepare students for that?
Yeah, so I first want to say that I actually didn't even see what you're wearing as a hoodie, right? It looks like a cardigan or something like that.
Perfect.
So, yeah, so if you hadn't even said that, I would have been like, oh, yeah, you're fine. No, but I would say the things that I'm doing a little bit differently are that more in the beginning of the semesters. Now, at the same time, I only teach this course once a year. So definitely will everything that I learned and experienced from this past semester, will it feed into next fall semester? Of course. And so I would anticipate that in the beginning of the semester, if we're still going to be utilizing Zoom, and if we're not able to, go down to Windcraft's headquarters in person and have that same kind of structure, then of course what I'm going to be doing at the beginning of the semester is more discussing that Zoom professionalism and whatnot from the get-go, right? And making sure as much as I can to make sure that the groups don't, it's going to sound bad, but what I've noticed is that when they are a little bit still uncomfortable, they'll err on the side of being more professional, right? So trying to, what I've been trying to consider is how can I make it so that we're not as comfortable, right, with folks at Windcraft still maintaining that professional situation or environment. And so I've rethought a little bit of if we're going to be on Zoom again, then maybe we can get in basically Zoom into a few other types of maybe sales meetings that they have, or other situations where they can broaden their scope of connecting with other Windcraft employees, because then they're going to be able to see firsthand as well. Oh, this is how I need to behave, and this is how I need to act on Zoom, and through that experience they can do that. So that was just one of the ways that I've been doing it. Also, for the other classes that I do teach, what I have been doing this past semester is that as I've had individuals come in for a short guest via Zoom lecture, right? I'll give the students enough advance notice to say, hey, listen, this is going to be more of a professional meeting, right? And just by saying that, they get the picture that, oh, if I overslept and woke up to my alarm beeping in my ear, 2 minutes before class was supposed to start, I'm gonna leave my video off, right? Like I'm not gonna whatever, right? So, or I'm gonna give myself enough time to look more presentable in that way. And I don't want to come across as nose up high or too snooty or anything, but I think that a sense of professionalism heightens the experience and creates a little bit more of a commitment to what it is that the students are doing. That's what I've noticed, right? And I've even noticed my dress, and if I dress in a certain way, then that also heightens a little bit of the experience. And so again, I think that it might have even been my fault that maybe I was even dressing a little bit too casually, when meeting on Zoom with the students and everything. Instead of having a shirt and tie, I often found myself with an open collar, sometimes even just like a not even a business casual dress, right? So like that's what I've noticed. So I think I need to adjust that as well in those types of settings. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you. I think it's a really interesting time for students, as they're kind of entering this workforce that's going to look a lot different. And yeah, so like how do we kind of hopefully help prepare them in some ways that, you are probably going to have to do presentations on Zoom. You might have to do job interviews on Zoom. Like those, companies are not maybe going to want to pay to fly people out for interviews in the same way they did before. And
of course,
so these are kind of new realities for these students. So are there ways we can help them to be a little better prepared for that? I think that's an important thing for us to be thinking about right now. So thank you.
Well, I think as well. So before you hop off, I got one more thing to say. So Robert and I were talking maybe a month or two ago, and he was saying, Windcraft is almost at a point now where we've just got to like the right out of college or right out of high school type of prospective employee is just doesn't necessarily have enough experience or knows our company culture enough to like we're just growing as a company, which is great for Windcraft. Again, if you and I as instructors are able to better prepare these students to be able to learn specific company culture or workplace norms and things like that, our students are going to have a leg up on all of those other universities or those other institutions that are not doing this, which is why I find that work integrated learning is so imperative to what we do as instructors.
Yeah.
You know, without our students knowing the Windcraft culture or the Windcraft workplace norms, I mean, they just couldn't get a job there now. They just or if they were going to get a job, it would be a, you know, I don't want to say, you know, any job is less than another one, but it would be a, you know, working on the floor in the manufacturing plant, you know, sewing stuff or, you know, things like that. I don't know, Robert, if you have anything to add to that, but that's, you know.
Yeah, uh, St. Mary's does a very good job of just prepping students for real world, and it's not just the sport management, it's very business department, it's hands-on real life experience, and I help with across the board with a few other areas of the business department, but they do a good job of integrating this work into and creating a student or a potential employee that challenges us to say, well, maybe they are ready to join us right away because they've proven themselves in a formal setting.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, I don't know. I think that might be all the time we have.
Yeah.
Julie, what school are you at again?
It's called Grand Prairie Regional College,
Grand Prairie.
and Grand has an E on the end, which is weird and people miss that, but yeah, it's in Northern Alberta.
Are you on LinkedIn?
Yes, but no.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, if you see me on there, then feel free to connect, and I'm happy to you know, look over anything for you or help you in the sport management proposal that you're doing or anything like that. So
Yeah, for sure. This is really interesting. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
awesome. No problem. Thank you
All
guys.
right. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you.